Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1Podcast, and it has been a little while. We can only apologise for that, but we have got some Qatar Grand Prix preview coming your way. That is, of course, this weekend. The third Qatar Grand Prix that we've had in recent years. They had one in 2021.
Yeah, Gasly on the front row.
Yeah, and there was some, COVID issues with that, and then they didn't sign on for a couple of years afterwards, and then we've got another one now after the excitement from last year with Piastri winning the sprint race before Lando ever won anything, which is pretty interesting. But then now the tables have turned a little bit. But speaking of Lando not winning anything, we did crown a new drivers' champion at Las Vegas last weekend. And we're just going to talk about that briefly before we jump into sort of action regarding this weekend. So we've got Max Verstappen, his fourth World Championship now. Seb and I saw it coming from the very beginning. But Amy, I mean, at the start of the season, you did throw in Lando Norris as a contender, as the winner, in fact. Yeah. But did you really think now, in the context of this title fight, what it turned into, how far ahead Max was there really much of a chance for Lando Norris to do it? I mean, did you really sort of truly believe that there was enough good fortune to come his way and enough sort of, errors for Max to make in the sort of last, 5-6 races of the season?
No, I didn't believe in what I said at all. I thought that he was going to win a race for the first time this year, but how in a season where you do win your first race and then you become a title contender, I think it is really impressive from him. I feel like, he's been so heavily judged and criticised this season, and he has made mistakes, but I compare him to Charles 2022. And he got 3 wins that season, Charles. It was, obviously, he'd won Monza and Spa before, but that was 2019. So it had been a while. He got 3 wins in that season, and he did look like the title fight. And he made mistakes that season, and he did lose it. And he was always going to lose it to Max, but he never got criticised, and he's always still been considered, he's going to be, world champion one day. And I feel like Lando Norris has been criticised. It's his first time he's ever won a race this season. So I, as a McLaren and as a Lando fan, I'm very proud of him, because to do what he did this season is impressive. And I think it's only hopeful and exciting for the next season. I think there'll be more drivers involved, including Oscar, but I'm really excited for Lando, and I think it's only up for him now. But I think it was always Max's. And like you said, Max isn't someone to make mistakes. And when Lando is trying to adapt to that, of being in a title fight, and it did look like that in Brazil. They were kind of close, and then it got a bit too big, and you were thinking that's not going to continue that title fight. They got to Brazil, and obviously Max was starting back in 17th. Lando on pole. That was the chance then to bring it back, and it just didn't. And I don't think Lando should be too down on himself about that. But yeah, Max deserved it thoroughly. At the end of the day, he's got 8 wins. Lando's only got 3. There you go. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, but hopefully for next season it'll be Lando again.
Yeah, I mean, if it is looking close for 2025 and even 2026, then I think what we had at Mexico was definitely a sort of good teaser for it. Some genuine championship fighting on track. And yeah, look, it was an uphill battle for Norris, and I do feel as though that he is getting a little bit too much stick, particularly online, about being the worst title contender in history. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't an excellent sort of challenge to Max, but it's not like it was Lando's to lose. Like you say, this was Max's championship to lose. And you've got to bear in mind, this is for his 4th World Championship, so he's been here before, and he's entering the sort of prime years physically of his career, never mind just sort of on paper with all the stats and stuff like that. I mean, not necessarily saying he will continue to be winning World Championships through till he's about 31, 32, but before he gets to 6, I can imagine he's retired just out of boredom. But that's not the point, really. I think it's a case of this version of Max Verstappen will be possibly the best that we see of him as a driver, just because you're right. He was under pressure from Lando Norris, arguably from Charles Leclerc at one point for the title, although I think people were just trying to mix something up, just for the sake of hope of entertainment, which we have had a good season, to be fair. So I think maybe everyone's getting a bit too greedy. But Max had that pressure from other drivers for the first time in a little while, and then managed to just hold off perfectly well. I mean, Seb, let's just go to you now, because you've been pretty quiet on the matter so far. I apologise for that, but so what do you make of the title fight? Is Norris getting too much stick? Because I know you're not his biggest fan. But,
I think I agree with what Amy said about this is his first year really competing at the top end of the field. And I think that, the comparison to Leclerc in 2022, and Leclerc we've seen since then has developed as a driver. And I think this year he's had a really good performance. He's looked really well-rounded in his performances. And I think we forget sometimes how young Norris really is.
Yeah.
Just because he's been in the sport for a while. He came in so young. And I think that, he's not had the most amazing season, but I think we also know he's got more to come, and it's been disappointing because we know he's got more performance in him, and he's shown at times that he has got more pace in him. So, Max has been at the top for so long. He's been able to deal with the pressure. He's been competing at the top, knowing that pressure, knowing what needs to be done. We saw it in Mexico. He knew what he needed to do, even if he was going to get criticism for the moves he made. He knew what he needed to do. But I think also we do have to say that Max, you could also tell in Mexico, was feeling the pressure of Norris. And I think you have to put some credit on Norris's name for, making Verstappen a little bit rattled. And that's the first time we've seen since 2021, Max having to act like that. And obviously Max in the end, I think Brazil was the most incredible champions drive that we've seen. And I think that was just... it showed he is a class above the rest, and even if he hasn't quite got the fastest car, I don't think it's as big of a difference as everyone's making out. But I think that, he ultimately was the difference this year, and I don't think there's any dirt on Lando's name, or any disrespect to him for losing to Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton lost to Max Verstappen, and Lewis Hamilton is arguably the greatest of all time. So I don't think this. I think he is getting a little bit too much criticism, and I think he will come back. And I think the only worry is that maybe this could be the best chance he's ever going to get. That's the only worry, and I hope that just doesn't play on his mind too much, and he is able to bounce back and think, look, this was my first chance. I'll keep going. So but obviously full credit to Max. Yeah.
Do you think that Max should now be considered as one of, if not the greatest driver?
Definitely. I think even before this year, I think he was up there. I think that 2023 is in arguably the greatest season in. I mean, statistically it is, and I think anyone that has a season like that. Look, Fernando's up there as one of the greatest, and he only won 2 championships. Ayrton Senna, Max has surpassed all of these people. And just because maybe he doesn't have that sort of flair of some other drivers potentially.
Favorited as well.
Some people don't like things about him, and look, I understand it, but I think he's definitely up there, and I think maybe, longevity, we'll see how that happens, how that comes. But even, you look, before he was winning championships, he was still an incredible driver as well. So, I think definitely he's up there. I think for me, it's difficult because I obviously didn't watch, Ayrton and Michael live back in the day. So for me, it is really only Lewis that I can really compare him to. But he's definitely up there for me.
I mean, he's got 4 world championships now, 4 on the bounce, and that, of course, matches, I suppose, the man that handed the baton to him. Maybe sort of a little bit indirectly, but of course, Sebastian Vettel finishing his time at Red Bull with 4 consecutive world championships as well. Would you say that Max's legacy at Red Bull has, surpassed that of Sebastian Vettel's accomplishments at the team?
I think it's hard because obviously that Red Bull and Vettel was it was the making of Red Bull, and he made that team, I guess, on his own. But Max has just took on that role, and now Red Bull, for the last 4 seasons, have just been the best team. They've become the Mercedes of the sport, and it's Red Bull dominance. I don't know. I want to say I think just the way he won 2023, beating all of Vettel's, accomplishments with that season, consecutive wins, I think maybe just...
I think so as well. I think that even though I love Sebastian, I think arguably his time after Red Bull has, I think, tainted that sort of time, because I think people then look back at his time at Red Bull and think, well, look at the other drivers who were competing at the time. You have Lewis, Fernando, Nico, and arguably if they'd had equal cars, people now look back at that and go, maybe he wasn't the best driver at the time, even though it felt like at the time, people hated Sebastian because he was so much better than everyone else.
Couldn't have a teammate match him.
I think people sort of forget that, and I think that's a little bit of a shame. But I still think, Max, I think if you have to choose who's a better driver, I think everyone would say Max. But I think in terms of legacy, I think it's hard to say really, but I would still probably go with Max as well.
Yeah, we'll move on shortly from this in a second. But now that he has won his fourth, where does this rank amongst his sort of championship efforts in terms of 2021 we had that amazing historic rivalry with Lewis. 2022, a little bit of a quieter year, some threat from Charles at the beginning. By the time the end of the season rolled around, it was pretty light work for him. 2023, record-breaking year. Just utter dominance, left, right, and centre. And then this year, a little bit different. Slow periods throughout the season, a sort of threat from an unlikely contender in Lando Norris and I suppose technically Charles Leclerc, although that was a little bit short-lived in terms of, actual hope for Charles to win the championship. But yeah, where Amy, we'll start with you. Sort of, if you could quickly rank each of Max's 4 championship wins, where would you put this one?
As speaking as a neutral, seeing it as a fan, I would have to say maybe second.
Okay.
Because I'm looking at it on the basis of how exciting and how much he did have to fight for that. And obviously, as much as 2023 was impressive, it
was a terrible season to watch, wasn't it? As a neutral, yeah.
He had to win it. So I'd probably go 2021 is unmatched, winning your first title on your last race. In the last race, no points go split in between you, and on the last lap as well. Obviously, a lot of controversy, but yeah, I think that's probably when he won that to win your first title, and that's why easy 2021. But then I would say this is second. I think because there's been so many race winners this year, and it did look at times like he might not win it. It was going to be a shock if he won it because of how good McLaren were. So I'd probably rate this second, and then I would want to say, because of how impressive 2023 was, I'd go go third for that, and then 22. Doesn't seem memorable
This
at
is
all.
forgettable,
No,
isn't it,
yeah.
2022?
The
I'd go
only thing
that
I remember
last.
is the French Grand Prix from that year and
Yeah,
Charles,
Charles
just
going
sort of
out,
knowing
yeah.
it was over at that point and there was
Yeah.
still so much of the season
so
to go.
much earlier.
If I had to rank them, for me it's tough with 2021 because it was so great throughout the season, but those last 4 races sort of just the way he sort of cracked under the pressure I felt in Saudi Arabia taints it a little bit. I think he was the better driver over the season, but then
performance
also
from Lewis in Brazil as well springs to
yeah,
mind.
and then Abu Dhabi, obviously, look, we all know what happened there, and it's tough to say because even though he deserved it, there's almost a part of me that's like, well, he didn't deserve. He did. So it's tough to say about 2021, even though it's so impressive because the performance he sustained across the whole season, going up against Lewis Hamilton, that's what for me maybe puts it at the top. Just because you look at the other seasons who he's been competing against, this season up against Lando, and obviously no disrespect again on Lando's name, but this is his first year competing for a championship. He was up against Lewis in 2021, where Lewis was coming off the back, fighting for his 8th championship. And then, Charles in 2022, similar situation to Lando this year.
Yeah.
So I think I'd go 21, 23 this year, and then 22.
Yeah, because it's just not memorable.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one, Seb. I mean, 21 for me, definitely the best.
Yeah.
And you do look at, the way it ended in Abu Dhabi, and you do wonder, was it the right decision? And, did he really deserve it? But and you're right as well, Seb. That sort of last small part of the season, there was a little bit of, questionable driving from Max, we shall say, especially in Saudi Arabia, like you brought up. But there were other drives of Max's that were just phenomenal. Even when Lewis performed well that season, Max was still, I think Russia was, the race that Lando Norris bottled his first win for. While Hamilton still won the race, Max started really far back, if I remember. And I just remember watching him in the cockpit, and I haven't seen a driver have better control of a set of brakes than he did around Russia that day in the wet, tricky conditions. But using that, that horrible heavy braking zone that goes sort of underneath that bridge thing. Yeah, he was making so many moves under there, and it was just, that was sort of people will look back at that and think, vintage Max Verstappen sort of thing. And then 2023, I think, just because it broke so many records, and it was just all you could do was sit back and watch. You had no other choice to try and sort of argue with how impressive it was. But then, this year, not just Lando winning a load of races, but I think because there were so many different race winners, and Red Bull weren't the ones coming second necessarily. I think because there was so much competition at the front, varying from race to race, because it was something. This is the first year I saw a stat. It was the first time in history or something like that where 7 different drivers have won
multiple.
2 races or 2 Grand Prix in a year. And so, even though there weren't a lot of them weren't in the championship fight, that still throws a spanner in the works for Max trying to maximise as many points as he can when other teams are quicker than both Red Bull and McLaren at certain weekends. And then 2022 just less said the better, really. I mean, it was it wasn't a great year by any means, but a championship win nonetheless. Now, enough about championships that have already concluded. Let's move on to one that's still underway this year, and that is the Constructors' Championship. And we'll do that by sort of talking about let's start off with the Qatar Grand Prix this weekend. It's still a fairly open battle for that Constructors' Championship. But, I mean, do we have any sort of, gun to head? Who are we saying, if you had to pick one right now?
It has to be McLaren.
Yeah, I think it has to be McLaren. I think Ferrari, we're not really too sure about how they're going to be over the last two circuits. They're a little bit, they're a lot more consistent than Mercedes, but they are still a little bit like that where, weekend to weekend they could be up or down. Or I think McLaren, even though they've been struggling a little bit recently, I think there's
still consistency.
They're still consistent.
It's been good enough sort of thing, yeah.
I think it's just a little bit too much of a points haul to overcome, and I think for me it's got to be McLaren. I think the battle for P6 though is also... That's something I'm very excited, very interested in. I think that one's not arguably not more interesting because P6 versus P1. Let's be real, but it's so close, and it's also the performance between those three teams is so close. I think this one is really down to the driver's performance for P6 between obviously the Haas pair experience, the Alpine pair, and then obviously the RB pair. I think that one's going to go down to the wire as well, and obviously because they're competing for such little points. If something random like Brazil happens again, completely swings it. And so I think that one's also... Yeah, there's still a lot to play for.
Do you think will win that one?
I think just about Alpine. I think their qualifying performances, their qualifying pace is just about going to get them over the line. I think that we could see a double Q3 not once again, but I think we could see another good Q3 strong qualifying performance from them. And I think, obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I do think they have the strongest driver pairing. And I think that I think RB are going to struggle the most. And I think Haas have maybe got the best overall package. So it's going to be interesting. But I think if I had to gun to my head, I'd say Alpine just about get it done.
If you look at the circuits left, though, I think it certainly favours Alpine a little bit more than Haas as well. Haas have been that that sort of car where it has just been fine around. Like there is literally no redeeming qualities about it. And instead of having that situation like they did a few years ago where there was no redeeming qualities and it was a terrible car, this time it's a car that's placed so firmly into the midfield. It's probably the most sort of medium bang average car that we've had this year. But again, no redeeming qualities. And we've got Abu Dhabi and Qatar, both fairly unique and sort of very high speed, medium speed oriented tracks. Qatar, it's just basically one big medium speed corner. In Abu Dhabi, there's loads of straights, and Alpine have really improved on their straight line speed from the start of the season. You look at all the speed traps, and usually Gasly in particular towards the top of them. And so I have a feeling that they will be quicker around these two circuits. Maybe not Qatar. I think it could be a little bit more open this weekend, but definitely in Abu Dhabi it will be Alpine's 6th place to lose. And then obviously, Williams, while mathematically possible, even possibly mathematically possible for Kick Sauber, that would involve, 1-2s. And actually, no, I don't even think that would be possible. So never mind. But yeah, do we think, just briefly, while we are talking about sort of obscure midfield championship battles, is there a point on offer for Sauber by the end of the season?
No.
I don't know, because their performance around Vegas, I think Vegas is obviously very different to the other circuits we're going to see, and obviously the cold temperatures I think suited Zhou quite a lot last weekend. I don't know. There'd have to be some sort of... I mean, we haven't seen that many mechanical failures over the course of the season. Saw a couple in Vegas, so maybe that will start creeping into teams that might potentially see some sort of an opportunity for them. But realistically, let's face it, it's not going to happen, is it?
Okay, so enough about teams fighting in the championship. Now let's talk about one that will be joining the rankings in just over a year's time. In 2026, we will be having Cadillac /Andretti /General Motors on the grid to compete in the 2026 Formula One season and beyond. So, of course, when the new regulations are in, bit of a level playing field for them. And I think the difference is with their application to join this time, there's no Michael Andretti. So that clearly seems to be a huge sort of difference maker there. wasn't part of the negotiations, doesn't seem to be part of the project full stop, and a rumoured, I think I read somewhere, another, $1 billion or something like that to sort of talk the FIA into it. So, hey, look, it's not maybe the greatest way to go about it, but I'm just thankful that we do have another team on the grid, because for a multitude of reasons, there is not enough room in F1 at the moment. I think the more teams, the better, but of course we can sort of go a bit too far in that regard and have too much competition on the grid. But there is a backlog of drivers, and there has been a backlog of drivers just waiting, all good enough to be in F1, just on the sidelines for years now. And so 2 extra spots on the grid could be really, really great to see. Now, of course, one of the main questions relevant to that is who is going to drive for them. I mean, I think punters' guesses right now, people are saying Colton Herta from IndyCar doesn't have a super license, but is really, really talented. But of course, there are loads of talents leaving the grid this year to maybe hope for that Cadillac opportunity in 2026. So if you're, I think Mario Andretti is the general manager now. So Amy, we'll start with you. If you're the general manager of Cadillac, of Andretti, of General Motors, whatever, who are the 2 drivers that you're choosing to take on? I mean, bear in mind, Mercedes have just sacked off Mick Schumacher, so whether that means he wants a driver of his own or Mercedes are picking up Valtteri Bottas as a reserve, we'll wait and see for that. But that sort of limits the options a little bit there, or expands them, depending on how you want to look at them, optimistically or pessimistically. But yeah, who are the 2 drivers you're bringing to the team?
Oh gosh,
it's a toughie, isn't it?
I really have no idea. Obviously, you've got so many drivers that have been let go over the years that just haven't made it in Formula One, but could have. I think, you know who I just want to see on the grid so bad, and it's not even like maybe he deserves it, but Felipe Drugovich.
Yes,
I think he's an incredible driver, and I just want him to have that chance. But I don't know who I'd pair him with. I mean, they're coming in 2026, isn't it? So that's when Audi's also going to be replacing Sauber. So, like, who's going to probably have the best start in Formula One? It's going to be interesting to see. But I feel like Carlos Sainz, like...
Do you think so?
I just can't see it working at Williams, and I think he does need to, depending on which team's probably going to be the most successful, where he's going to go could be one of the 2 new teams. I think it more be Audi because of obviously there's relations there with his father, but like I do think he needs to get away from Williams when he has the opportunity to do so. But I'm going to admit something. I don't really like the idea of 11 teams.
Oh, really?
Wow.
And the only reason I do like it is the fact that we can maybe push more junior drivers into the sport and make sure that there's more people getting a seat. But I just don't like tampering with stuff. I think there's teams that, like Williams, who could develop into back to what they used to be if they get the money. And I think the prize is good. Money's going to be spread out now even more. I just don't like things being messed with. I like 20 drivers on the grid. I like the fact that the top 10 get in the points, and if you don't finish in that, you've got nothing. And yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of it, and I don't know how I feel about the brand, like Cadillac. I don't think, like, obviously Andretti's famous in motorsport, but I just think, like, it needs to be a bigger name to even consider it. Does that make sense?
I know what you mean.
If anyone has an eye on Amy Hammerslog's PO box, then just let me know if there's that sort of big golden letter from the FIA with loads of money in there. Because I mean, I get your point. Sort of, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But do you not think it is a little bit broken at the moment?
The fact that people like Drugovich haven't been able to get in the sport.
No,
The fact that even Piastri had
the
to wait a
reason.
whole year to get in
we
the
have
sport.
2 F2 champions that are yet to have a Grand Prix
Yeah.
drive in F1 in Teo Porcher and Felipe Drugovich,
Yeah.
both with experience behind an F1 wheel. And of course, Porcher tried it in IndyCar. Drugovich has sort of done things here and there. I think he's done a bit of endurance racing, hasn't he, Drugovich? So they've kept themselves busy. But ultimately, these are 2 drivers that objectively deserve to drive in F1.
Yeah.
There is no
That's
better
the
way.
reason I do like it. But I just... If you were good enough, would you already be on the grid? And I'm not saying that about them, but like if the
I know what you
opportunity
mean.
comes, then it's going to come for a reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be a bit of a devil's advocate for it, but I just like... I don't like change, and it is going to change, and I just think 22, it's not a nice number.
Yeah,
I like
I'd prefer
20.
12. Just as from like a, you know, just like a 11's like a bit.
I think we'll just get what we're given, you know?
Yeah, I
I think
know what you
more teams, no matter how many more there are. I think 12 is the perfect number, to be fair. But we're one step closer. If we bring in Cadillac in 2026, I mean, Seb, how about you for drivers? I mean, there's plenty to choose from.
I think obviously Colton Herta is the obvious choice. I think obviously being American, being relatively young, and he's obviously, his hype's died down a little bit in the last couple of years with his performances in IndyCar, but he's still obviously been up there. Obviously AlphaTauri tried to get him in, so that shows how much they highly regarded him. McLaren tried to get him in, so I'm sure he'll help expand that American market. I think that's a good thing about it being Cadillac, even though I think obviously here in the UK Cadillac's not that sort of that big brand, neither are General Motors, but they're absolutely huge. So I think that in terms of bringing that reach to the States, which we know F1 want to do so much, I think having an American driver that hopefully would actually perform a bit better than Logan Sargent, I think that'll be helpful. And I think they are going to do that, just the classic sort of younger rookie driver and a more experienced driver. And if I'm looking at experienced drivers that are going to be out of the sport at that point, I'm thinking of two names. I'm thinking Bottas and I'm thinking Magnussen. I think it's tough between the two of them. I think I'd probably go just for Magnussen, just on the chance of it. He's a little bit younger, I think anyway. And I feel like he's got a little bit more to prove. And I feel like his performances this season haven't been amazing by any stretch of the imagination. But he's he's had weekends where he's been able to show a bit more than Bottas. And I know it's been hard on Bottas. He hasn't had the full opportunities to show everything he's got. But I'd maybe go for Magnussen. Otherwise, I'd maybe think about Isaac Hadjar. I think if he's not able to get in that RB drive, obviously we expect there is going to, I expect Perez is going to, at least by 2026, he's going to be gone. But I'd be thinking maybe Colapinto's going to get that drive. And then where does Isaac Hadjar go? He's good enough, I think, to get in there. And we've seen from Colapinto that you don't necessarily have to be winning F2 to get in, to be good enough to get an F1. And I think Hadjar's arguably shown more in his junior career than Colapinto. So I'd maybe Colton Herta and Isaac Hadjar. But if Hadjar, does get that RB shot, then I'd go for Magnussen.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's obviously that sort of cycle of RB, Red Bull Group sort of drivers. I think it is likely, because Hadjar does look like the real deal, to be fair. He does look like a very decent young talent that Red Bull have on their hands. Maybe not exactly the man to beat Max Verstappen, but, I mean, who is going to be that guy? Do you know what I mean? So, I think it looks as though I think Red Bull will want to lock down Hadjar, even if he doesn't drive for the team, just so he doesn't drive for someone else, because he does look like a pretty, I'd say there's plenty of talent there. But I don't know. I mean, it's tough. I mean, Bottas, I want Bottas in the spot. I do like Valtteri Bottas a lot, but I do get the impression that even though it is hard to judge, obviously, with how poor Sauber have been in recent years, particularly this season, I'm starting to think that maybe Bottas isn't the same driver he once was, simply because he's saying, I don't know why he's trying to, make things better by saying, oh, yeah, I'm driving the best I ever have done in my career, and it's not being able to show for it because of the car. But, if you were driving that well, surely you do something with it by now. Of course, with a bit of luck to help you out, but, by now, maybe a point would be possible.
I think if you put in Max Verstappen in that Sauber, I think he's at least getting 1 point over the course of the season.
Considering, I don't think
he's at least getting one P11 to finish ahead of show.
Yeah. I don't even think the gulf between this Sauber and the rest of the grid is quite as large as we've had with other teams that have finished with 0 points.
No.
Think of when Williams were getting no points in the year, Haas as well. Those cars were miles behind, literally miles behind. Yeah. And Sauber, sure, they're getting lapped, but they're not finishing plumb last every single race like Williams and Haas used to do. Joe finished pretty strongly around Vegas, didn't he? And that was just last weekend. So, look, I'm starting, but my bottom line is that I don't think Bottas is the same driver he once was at Mercedes, which is a shame, because he's the only driver I've met. So that's sort of, a bit of a weird flex. But definitely a blend of experience and youth. Magnussen, again, seems like the obvious pick. I'm pretty sure, though, Romain Grosjean has driven for the Andretti IndyCar team.
Sure.
And Grosjean return to the grid could be...
Resurrection.
No.
It'd be funny.
It would be funny.
I mean, to be fair, look, I don't think he's as bad as everyone remembers him to be. He hasn't had a terrible stint in IndyCar. Very quick start, and then haven't heard anything about it ever since. So, maybe that's sort of...
Little Giovinazzi return?
Oh,
that would be the resurrection.
I would love that. I think, Gio's one of my sort of inexplicably favourite drivers ever. But it's a weird one with Andretti, because or Cadillac, however we want to call them. I hope it's not another team with 17 names and we have to decide on the spot which one it is. But hopefully with Cadillac there are 2 appropriate drivers for them. But if I had to pick, I'd probably say K-Mag, because by that point, 2026, he will be very experienced. Even if he doesn't get a drive next year, I'm sure he'll be still in and around the sport somewhere. And if there's if it is Ferrari supplying the engines to them, which I believe they are the favourites to be, then maybe Giovinazzi still got ties to the team, so that would make sense for the more experienced driver. Sorry?
If they don't think Ollie Behrman's ready for that Ferrari seat yet as well, I guess that, and they come in strong, maybe a step up from Haas.
Oh, okay, so like a middle ground between Haas and Ferrari. Yeah, that makes total sense, to be fair. I don't know if Behrman would want to do that though.
Yeah.
Although he is still really young, so I can imagine he will sort of take it one step at a time. I'm trying to think other Ferrari youth drivers.
Robert Schwartzman, but he's gone to IndyCar.
Well, that's the thing. This new Premier IndyCar team are going to take all the Ferrari talent. Arthur Leclerc, Robert Schwartzman's definitely gone now.
Yeah.
Mick Schumacher, no ties to the team anymore. Although I do see him maybe making the switch to Cadillac. I feel like they'd want to get the name in, and it would make total sense.
I'd like to see him back on the grid.
I think so.
I want to see a second go for him.
If that Cadillac is nowhere near as terrible as that Haas that he had to drive was, particularly in that first season, which was regarded as the better one. If it is a competitive car in the midfield, then let's see what Mick has to offer.
Yeah.
I'd be happy with the Mick and Magnussen reuniting maybe, but it would feel a little bit stale. I feel as though they could be a bit more adventurous than that. But that, only time will tell with how they handle their driver's situation. We are running out of time in the studio, unfortunately, and we do need to wrap up some predictions for this weekend. So this will be a little bit more quickfire than usual, but if you are new around here, we do a set list of predictions before every race weekend and every race weekend we can, and we try and analyse them after every race weekend as well. So we'll start off with our predictions for pole position. We are keeping track of everything as well. So after Abu Dhabi in a couple of weeks' time, we will be able to crown our inaugural predictions champion, which, that seems like... It feels like the season's gone really quick. I feel like it's just... I'm like waiting to catch up to Amy and nothing's happened. So, spoiler alert, it's likely going to be Amy to be our predictions champion for 2024, but maybe next year.
Verstappen.
Yeah.
That is me at the minute.
No, you've done very well this year, to be fair. But we'll start off with our pole position prediction. Wow, I'm struggling with words. In the latter stages of this podcast, we've all gone McLaren, but who have you guys gone for instead of myself?
Well, I think it's going to be either the two, but
we both gone for Norris.
Yeah,
Lando.
Norris. I just think, even though last weekend probably would have been a bit rubbish for him, he wants to finish on a high. Charles Leclerc is still coming for that P2 in the driver. If he can't be world champion, at least be vice world champion. I think that's something. So Charles Leclerc is still coming for him, and he does need to finish ahead of him to ensure that he gets P2. I think I can see him trying a little extra harder this weekend. It's still something to fight for, and I think it'll be Lando Norris on pole.
I just think McLaren's are going to be really quick this weekend. I think they're the favourites in my eyes to be the quickest team this weekend. I think Lando. Oscar's been struggling a little bit of recent, so I think that Lando, he's got the measure of him in the last few races. I think he's just going to continue that trend, and we know he's got pace over one lap, and I think he's just, without any pressure of any sort of trying to keep the championship fight alive, I think he'll be able to get pole quite comfortably.
Yeah, no, it's not really one that you can argue too much with. My only sort of thing that I would sort of maybe try and sort of argue for is that, Piastri, okay, Norris does have to finish P2 in the championship, but what is more important, putting Norris ahead of Piastri or making sure that both drivers finish well no matter what order for them to, succeed in the Constructors. And I don't think, if they say to Oscar, you're going to have to move out of Lando's way because we want him to finish P2 in the championship, he's not going to do that,
well,
is he really?
That's what Charles Leclerc wants, isn't it?
Yeah, and Carlos definitely isn't.
Lando Norris has just been finishing ahead of Oscar Piastri, to be fair to him, and I don't think they will do that, but I think Lando will just finish ahead of him to be able to get that P2. I don't think he'll have to ask to move out the way.
I think this will be a weekend, because although I could have literally just Googled this before we did it, I think in the build-up to the last Qatar race weekend, Piastri wasn't exactly in, amazing form. And then out of nowhere, amazing sprint race, and I don't think he did too badly in the race as well, but didn't some sort of terrible fortune come his way? I probably should remember this. But, it was a weekend to be proud of for Piastri last year, even though it was sort of amidst some, pretty bang-average form. And I feel like that will just be the same again this weekend. We have sort of noticed that with Piastri, that he can just sort of, bring out a really strong performance sort of out of thin air around a track that McLaren should be strong at. And I have sort of noticed that in the tracks around the circuits where McLaren are strong as a team. The drivers are quite close together, realistically, Piastri and Norris. There is sort of, when both cars are firing on all cylinders and they're both sort of finely tuned with the car, I think there isn't very much to separate the two of them at all. So I feel like, just because based off his track record, it might be the easier pick, but I'm going to say Piastri. Maybe a little bit naive there, but I think now that there is no sort of drivers' championship thoughts in the way, I think this is definitely Piastri's. Maybe not to lose, but definitely a strong chance for him to succeed. Now, just because Norris and Piastri could finish on pole, it doesn't mean that they are our stars of qualifying. And so for our next prediction, Seb, we'll start with you. Who is going to be your star of quali?
I've gone for Esteban Ocon. I think he's had a decent year when it comes to qualifying up against his teammate, but the last few races he admitted on the radio he's been losing about half a second compared to Gasly, just from not feeling that comfortable with the setup. But he's obviously had quite a few races under his belt since Austin with the upgrades, and I think he's just going to gradually have gotten more and more comfortable. Had a good performance around Qatar last year, so I think Ocon, he'll be able to get the measure of his teammate this weekend, and he's going to be my star qualifying.
Interesting, Sean. You've warmed to him this year. You really have sort of warmed to Ocon a little bit, which is nice to see. Amy, who is your start of qualifying?
Well, obviously, two teams that are going for that P6, and I think it is going to be RB who gets it. So I'm backing Yuki Tsunoda, and that's because I think he's been incredible this season, and he's shown why he should probably have that second seat at Red Bull. And therefore, I just think he's going to do well. I think he needs to finish this season on a high to show Red Bull, I am here, and I do want... He keeps making them comments in the media.
He has said that he is...
When I'm in
ready.
That Red Bull seat,
he is ready to
when
take
I go
him
into
on.
that, so he knows what he's doing, and he just needs to prove that on track, and I think that's what he has been doing, and I think that's going to continue in Qatar this weekend. So Yuki.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I mean, it is a circuit that suits his strengths as well. His driving style does sort of go hand in hand with that sort of, aggressive medium speed nature of it, I think. And then, he's just been solid all year, and why should that stop with just 2 races to go? Now, my star of quali might come as a bit of a surprise. It does go hand in hand with another prediction that I make, and I think you will both know which one that is, and those that have seen this before will know which prediction that is. I have said Lance Stroll to be my start of qualifying. Now, bear with me, he is in horrendous form, and he has had a terrible year. And particularly in qualifying, it has been a season to forget for him. But this Qatar circuit and that Aston Martin car do go pretty well together. I mean, an entirely medium-speed corner track, and that Aston Martin, as long as no one else is going any quicker, they are solid in the medium-speed parts of the track. Once it gets to high speed, you need some actual straight-line speed. That's where they start to crumble a bit. The car gets a bit heavier. But they do have decent downforce in those medium-speed tracks. So I think I'm just going to say Stroll because Alonso seems like the boring choice, but I don't know, I feel like you can only be this bad for so long, especially when you've made it to F1, and so I think based off purely logic and a hunch that Lance Stroll will make it. I think I say later on he'll make it into Q3, so start of quali for Lance Stroll. I just think even if it's just P10, the fact that he's gotten that far, considering the season that he's had, star of quali for me, definitely. But let's move on to the flop of quali now. Amy, we'll start with you. Who have you said to be the worst driver in qualifying?
I mean, it doesn't get much worse than being a race winner and then flopping the next week. So I have gone for George Russell because it will be a pretty bad flop if it does flop. But I think that's just to do with how well they did in Vegas on the cold tyres worked so well. And we seen last year in Qatar, it was so hot. The drivers were passing out. Literally, Logan Sargent had to come in because he felt so ill. It was that hot. And therefore, I don't know, because they did kind of all right last year, Mercedes, but I don't know, I just feel like there'll be such a different standards have been set from like in Vegas that I think it'll be a bit of a flop and maybe Q2 exit or very low starting in qualifying top 10. I feel like they won't be in the mix with Ferrari or McLaren.
Interesting you say that. I mean, would you not think he's been in pretty decent form? I mean, obviously the race win, you can't really argue with that. But he was strong around Qatar last year as well, so that would be quite the surprise if he does end up being a flop of qualifying. But that also sort of means he has been more of a flop. So I respect that. It's an interesting shout. And Seb, who are you saying to be your flop?
I'm going for someone who struggled a little bit over past weekends. I'm going for Liam Lawson. I think that obviously You said about Yuki Tsunoda having, he's really trying to stamp his mark on getting that second Red Bull seat. I think that, he's just going to be bringing the performance once again. I think we've definitely seen it over one lap. Tsunoda has, I'd say, definitely got the measure on Lawson, maybe a little bit closer when it comes to the races. But I think, just because it's going to be so close for getting into Q2, getting into Q3 with that fight in the midfield, I think that obviously the extra experience Tsunoda has, the extra experience all those other drivers around them, the Alpines, the Hasses, I think that's just going to come to the fore, and I think that Liam Lawson might struggle a bit, and maybe, lower end of Q2 whilst his teammate might sneak into Q3. So, I've gone for Liam Lawson.
Yeah, it could be one of the deciding weekends for Red Bull to see who can partner Max Verstappen next year if they do choose to get rid of Sergio Perez. These two races now are such a massive proving ground for Tsunoda and Lawson. So, if your prediction comes true, that could really sort of change the sphere of the top of F1 for quite some time. We'll move on. No, we won't. I've not done my flop of quality yet. It pains me to say it, as I am now a sort of honorary Haas fan, but I have said Nico Hülkenberg. I just think a driver that's been in really decent form, particularly again in qualifying at the moment, sort of getting that Haas up into positions where it shouldn't really be, considering how competitive it is at the front of the field in that top 10. He's still finding a way to sneak into Q3 somehow. But I feel as though, again, I think this circuit won't suit the Haas down to a T. I think other cars with more sort of unique strengths will be able to sort of exert them around this track. And Haas, I don't think, have a great history around this circuit either. So, it would make sense for Hülkenberg maybe to have a little bit of an off weekend. I can see it being one of them where maybe even Magnussen somehow makes it into Q3 and Hülkenberg's just nowhere to be seen. That's sort of a bit of I wasn't too sure what to put for that one, because I think everyone does look quite strong going into this weekend, without saying the obvious sort of Sergio Perez shout as well. So, I think everyone's a bit sick of that one by now. But let's move away from qualifying and talk about the results of the race. So now our podium predictions. Amy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've gone for Norris. Like I said, it's going to be either Lando or Oscar. So number 1, Norris. Number 2, Piastri. And then I've literally just changed who I think is going to be third, taking that last spot on the podium. And I changed it from Charles to Carlos. And I just think, why not? I think with Ferrari, they've got to go for this constructors, but they've also, like Charles was saying last weekend, that he does want P2 and he's gonna, he's only gonna think about himself now. And I don't know, I feel like that might scare Ferrari in a way, because that is now their driver for going into next season. Who cares about Carlos Sainz? But they need both of them to go for the constructors. And I can just see some heads being lost. I could see them trying to manipulate Carlos's strategy, which is they don't need that at all going into this to try and
the team radios you already know are going to be amazing.
And can't wait. So I just think Carlos Sainz might get the best of him. I think Charles can lose his head quite quickly. We've seen that in 2022. And I think Carlos has nothing to lose here. So therefore, I just think it'd be nice. Last little podium potentially with the team. And I kind of hope it is him, because I just thought that it was totally out of character and pocket for Leclerc to say what he said on the radio. But that's
interesting you say that. Yeah, this is the sort of part of the season now where Carlos just is allowed to drive like a man possessed. The Drivers' Championship is wrapped up, and while he wasn't necessarily in that, there was still a chance for Charles up until a couple of weeks ago. And of course, Ferrari do need that. They do need that Constructors' Championship, but it isn't going to be as big a factor for Carlos if they don't win it. He isn't going to be as upset, considering they were the same team that kicked him out. So maybe there is some sort of buried down resentment there. I don't want to maybe speculate anything, but this can be where Carlos either does the right thing and help the team out, or he just drives like a man possessed and just doesn't care about what Charles needs in terms of a podium or race track position, whatever. But to be fair, they don't really need to swap the drivers around anymore, though, do they? Sure, Leclerc could go and finish P2 in the championship, but again, I don't think it's as big a deal as the constructors. Yeah, exactly. So,
the only way I care about Lando getting it is because what a flop if he doesn't now.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? What the hell, you've had this amazing season and you still haven't finished P2. That's my only thing when looking at it like that. But who actually does care about P2? It's,
Leclerc's finished there before, so it's who cares?
Literally.
It doesn't
he got
matter,
a big bonus, didn't he, for that as well?
I was going to say, unless it makes financial sense, then there isn't really that much of an incentive. Although there could be some sort of more monetary things that we're not too sure of, like there is in the Constructors' Championship fight. But Seb, we'll talk about your podium now. Who have you got to finish in the top 3? We've cut out the sprint as well, by the way. We tend to do that on Sprint weekends. It just complicates things more than you can imagine, we promise. But yeah, sorry, Seb, who's your podium?
So I've gone for P3, I've gone for Carlos Sainz. P2, Charles Leclerc, and P1, Lando Norris. I think, once again, I think that McLaren are just going to have enough pace over the course of the weekend to get the job done. I think Lando Norris is going to be able to do that. Ferrari, double podium, no. I think, again, Piastri, even though obviously really predicted him to be on pole and maybe have a bit of a stronger weekend, I think he's in a bit of a rut, and I think that's just going to continue just because the other drivers around him are in such good form at the moment. I think Sainz is on top of his game. Leclerc, even if he isn't on top of his game, he's going to try really, really hard to be on top of his game, because I don't think he's going to want this end the season with people questioning about, could Sainz have stayed? Should he have stayed?
Yeah.
I think both of them are going to be pushing like mad, man. And I think, Leclerc's just about going to have the edge, but Sainz is still going to have a really good performance, and maybe he might back off fighting a little bit just so he can keep some good sort of feelings within the team, just in case, and maybe in a few years, or like Lewis does struggle there, and in a couple of years they need a driver back, and Carlos is like, well, look, I worked well with Leclerc, whatever. So I think he might back off a little bit. But yeah, I've gone for Norris P1 and Leclerc P2, Sainz P3.
Yeah, no, nice prediction. That, I mean, so you're thinking Ferrari will have the better of Mercedes for this weekend. Then?
Yeah, I think Mercedes is actually going to struggle a fair bit. I think that obviously they've been so inconsistent, and I just can 100% see them having another stinky weekend after having an amazing weekend. I think obviously the cold temperatures in Vegas supposedly helped them out quite a bit, and obviously the structure of the Vegas strip circuit was obviously so different compared to Losail, and I just think it's going to be a completely different setup. I think it's a completely different order. I think that they're going to struggle. I know it's not going to be quite as hot as it was last year. I think it's about in the mid-20s compared to it was like 40 degrees last year.
Yeah, it was crazy.
So they maybe won't struggle horrifically, but I think I don't think they're going to be up there competing that well.
I don't think I've got quite as pessimistic a view on how well Mercedes will do this weekend. I think to round out the podium, it will be George Russell in P3, and then I've gone with the McLaren 1-2, but I don't think Piastri will convert that pole position into a race win. I think now that the pressure is totally off Lando Norris, he might just, be beaten fair and square by Piastri in qualifying, but he'll have a race start that'll be one of them really sort of out of character good ones that he has every so often. No pressure, no reason to actually make any overtakes, and of course he will go and do just that rather than drop down 5 places down the grid like he sometimes does, and then I just think it'll be a case of he'll have the better Piastri for the remainder of the race. But as for Mercedes, there's no denying the form that Russell is in at the moment. He is driving really, really well, and with lots of confidence as well, although you are very right, Seb, the consistency that Mercedes have had this year has been a bit of an issue, particularly both drivers doing well in one race weekend. They sort of they need to pray for that to happen, then it happens once and it won't happen again for months. So yeah, it's one of them for Mercedes where they do need to work on their consistency. But you're right about them not. So it's not ideal that they don't know why they were so quick in Vegas. If they could have just made something up, that would have been at least helpful to try and talk about their success about on a podcast. But yeah, I just think if you look at how well they did at Qatar last year, I think particularly George Russell as well. It seems to be a track that he gels with quite well. And then as for 1 and 2, I think it'll just be pretty comfortable for McLaren. This is the track that will suit their car the best out of anybody else on the grid, and again they have nothing to lose in the Drivers' Championship, and they've got to go and win the Constructors' Championship as well. So plenty relying on them, and plenty also off their shoulders as well. But away from the podium now, and on to the driver of the day. Amy, who is yours?
I've gone for a very simple one, especially if he wins it, it'll be Lando Norris.
Yeah, the fan vote king.
He's not had one for a while, so I think it'll be his moment. So yeah, Lando.
And Seb, yourself?
I sort of forgot about that we go by the fan vote thing, but I've gone for Nico Hülkenberg. I think, he's been in race pace. He's been really good. Like, even in Vegas, it's like, wasn't really anywhere to be seen in qualifying the Hasses, but somehow he still finished best of the rest. Their strategy's been on it, and he's been there to take advantage of when they've got that strategy right. They've got decent pace around, seemingly every sort of circuit. They're very well rounded. I think he could somehow scrape best of the rest just again and have a really solid performance. So yeah, I've gone for Nico Hülkenberg.
I've gone with another oldie. I've said Fernando Alonso. Again, just going back to that theory that Aston Martin could have a tiny bit of pace round Qatar this weekend in comparison to everywhere else, where it just seems as though they are falling further and further away from where they want to be. But yeah, no, Fernando, look, he's done well at this track in the past as well. It definitely suits his sort of, aggressive driving style a little bit more. And of course, you've got to have sort of, quite a healthy pair if you want to make an overtake around this track as well. So yeah, you've got to, and Fernando certainly does just that. So I think with the tiny amount of pace that the car can have, more so than other race weekends, I think, this is definitely one that Alonso could do a little decent midfield result job. And not another podium, but, something, more impressive than their results as of late. Now, enough about talking well of the drivers. Let's move on to our flops of the day. Amy, you have given it to the newly crowned world champion. Why will Max flop this weekend?
Why not? Just think like that. Not he's not the sort of driver that once he's won a championship he gives up. Like, it's not like we've seen that where he's won it in Japan before and had a few races to go. So I don't think that'll necessarily be the case. I just would find it so funny that it would be Lando's luck that he's going to go on to win this race and Verstappen's going to get a DNF or doesn't finish, or I don't know. I just, not necessarily it being bad.
The second Lando's not mathematically capable of winning the championship, and Max just puts it in a wall or something like that.
I don't think it's necessarily going to be a Verstappen mistake though, but I just think, I don't know, I just can see Red Bull really not being the best round here, and I think potentially DNF is on the card, so yeah, why not?
Yeah. No, fair dues. I mean, it would be hilarious, like you say. But, there is no reason for him to be a flop. He does end up driving quite well once he has won a championship again. Maybe a little bit less mental. But you can also sort of swing it the other way and think, he's got more excuse to be a bit more mental, I guess. Yeah. Because now he's won the championship, he can take more risks. And Red Bull aren't really in the constructors' fight either. Yeah. So, but of course, position in that sort of ladder does matter to the teams more than the drivers, trying to finish P2 or whatever. Because, of course, there is a sizable difference in cash if you finish third or fourth or fifth, depending on, which one you finish in, there is a sizable cash difference. Seb, you've gone and directly contradicted one of my previous predictions, and I have a horrible feeling you'll do what you usually do and manage to talk me round into believing what you are going to predict for this weekend.
Yeah, I'll be able to talk you around, though. I'll be able to talk you around, and then it comes to the race, and I'm just completely wrong. But I've gone for George Russell. Yeah, I'm sort of backing that trend of not backing Mercedes this weekend, and also I think I've chosen him flopping in the race over the qualifying just because of that, the cliche that we've seen I think throughout their time as teammates, that Hamilton's got the edge when it comes to race pace. I think we sort of saw that in Vegas as well. I know there was more ground for Hamilton to make up. If he
did better in qualifying, he probably would have won that race.
So I think that when it comes to race pace, I think Hamilton's got that in him. So I think that, and I think they'll both be starting quite far back. I don't think they'll have the best qualifying, either of them, but I think that Hamilton, will prove once again when it comes to race pace, he has got the edge over him. Russell will fall back, Hamilton make up a couple of places. So yeah, I just think, and then with the teams in the midfield having so much to fight for, they'll be pushing so hard, and I think that potentially, he could have a little bit of a stinky Sunday. So I've gone for George Russell.
Yeah, mine's just basically Franco Colapinto, because I don't really want to say it, but I've got a feeling that, we were talking about it sort of, I don't know if it was off camera or earlier in the podcast, but, the hype for Colapinto has died off a little bit, which is such a huge shame because he made such an excellent start to life in Formula One. But Williams have had no real track record around Qatar either. A couple of points from Albon in the sprint last year, but then over a longer distance, it seemed to be what killed them a little bit. And I just think, new track, a completely new track for Colapinto. We saw how Sargent got on last year, and it was pretty tough for him. This is not an easy track for new drivers in F1 cars. And so I just think, through maybe no fault of his own, because the car will be slow and it's a new track, I just think, it seems to make sense that it could be Colapinto to be the flop of this weekend. Although there isn't really any expectation for him either, so can you call him a flop? Not really, but yeah, a little bit of a underperformance for him in the race, I reckon. We've also said the same team for the best team of the weekend, so we'll keep it short and sweet. We've all said McLaren. Apart from them probably having the best car for the track, does anyone have any other reason why they should be the best team this weekend?
Got good drivers, and they'll just be able to convert, I think.
I'll be shocked if anyone but Lando or Oscar wins it. I will be shocked. Even if Leclerc.
They'll definitely win at least either the sprint or the race, I think.
I think
that's a guarantee, I feel like.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, moving swiftly on from a pretty easy, hopefully a pretty easy prediction. Otherwise, we look like idiots after that. Amy, you said shock just then. Now it's time for our shock predictions. I said mine earlier in the pod, and I said Stroll to make it into Q3, which is, a bit mental if that does happen. But you guys have some pretty spicy ones as well. Amy, what's your shock prediction to round out the predictions for the Qatar Grand Prix?
Yeah, I've gone for Charles Leclerc to DNF, so to not finish the race. I just think, like I kind of mentioned before, with the whole Ferrari drama situation, he can quite easily lose his head, and I could potentially see him trying to drive outside of his skin, literally, to push that car. And we've seen
he does
it
that a lot.
before.
He does take it over the limit, doesn't he?
He does, and that's also a talent, but it can also be a curse for him. And I genuinely think, that's gonna secure Lando that P2. And hopefully also a McLaren, what's it called? Constructors Championship. So yeah, I don't know. It's a bit random, but I think Charles can lose his head, and that's why I've gone for a little DNF for him.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I mean, to be fair, that has got Charles written all over. When the stakes are high and it's towards the end of the season, it's been a really long year for him where he's performed so well and he gets a little bit overconfident, a little bit, maybe too passionate about Ferrari's success, and then we find him in a wall sort of halfway through a stint. Seb, what about you?
I've gone for maybe something that's not the most shocking thing in the world. I've gone for Lewis Hamilton out in Q2, and I'm also going to add SQ2 as well. So either of those two sessions, he's going to,
a little double whammy. Okay,
take away probably a point if I get it, but. Stroll Q3, SQ3.
Yeah, okay. We'll say Stroll.
DNF sprint and race.
There we go.
Mental, to be fair. That's 100 points there, surely. And I think an investigation as well, if you're saying that.
We're good mates between Charles.
But
yeah, I think Lewis Hamilton out in SQ2 or Q2. I think that it's just when it comes to that one lap, even if he, I think maybe SQ2 is actually less likely, just because obviously the classic thing we talked about so much on this podcast before about once they actually change the setup after he's been feeling comfortable in the practice sessions, and then it comes to qualifying and he's just all over the place. So, with sprint qualifying having only had one practice session, that might not come into his effect as much. But if he does struggle in sprint qualifying and the sprint race, and they change the setup for qualifying to try and make him more comfortable, and they change it too much, and he's just out of anywhere. And I think that, I could see that happening. I think as well, if the Mercedes aren't quite up to pace this weekend, as I predict, then I think that potentially then, he's not going to be that motivated. He might not really care about it too much. And I think, a little early exit for Hamilton in qualifying.
So that just about does it now for our predictions for this weekend's Qatar Grand Prix. Make sure to stick around next week so the scores on the doors will be released for that. And after that, just one more race to go in Abu Dhabi. And then definitely stick around on the channel so we can react to all of our predictions that we've made at the start of the year, including driver head-to-heads, the 2025 driver lineup, and, who's going to win what, etc., etc. So, thank you very much for sticking around. And make sure to click subscribe if you haven't already, because we do try and upload as much as we can. We're just very busy at the moment, all of us at uni. So there's not a lot of time for us to do this, but we do still very much enjoy putting out our content for you. And make sure to stick around, click subscribe, tell your friends, whatever. And we'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.